Well, welcome back to Untanglement. We're here on the floor of the Mindset Factory where we build mindsets, as you can tell.
It looks like a lot of mindsets have been built on this factory floor.
Yep. They have been. Yep. Some good, some bad.
Some good, some bad. You never know what you're going to end up with.
I know. Yeah. So what are we talking about today?
You mentioned something about a retreat.
Yes. Retreat.
Or making a change. Or
Uh-huh.
how do we know if we've changed?
Yeah. So kind of stepping back from this, like when we look at the kinds of things that organizations want to build, experiences they want to create, so oftentimes we hear companies say, "We have the annual retreat, right? The annual event. It's a retreat or a getaway or something along those lines," and it's a big deal, right? It only happens once a year, etc. But I think in order for us to kind of look at what we need to understand about retreats, we have to understand a couple of things. We have to understand and talk about, first of all, an experience, like what is an experience and how do we create the right experience? If you're going to create a retreat, obviously, people, when they think about retreats, they think about going away, going to an exotic location, doing activities that maybe the people in the group don't normally do or do together. And have you been on company retreats?
I have.
Yeah. Good memories about them?
You know, I have good memories, and I think if done correctly, they can be impactful to an organization.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a lot. I guess I wouldn't say I have a lot of memories, but I do have some.
Yeah.
And I think, it's fun to have this conversation because, what does the modern day retreat look like?
What does it look like? Yeah. And I have some experiences as well. Just a company I used to work for, and we used to have retreats and go on retreats and some memories about that. But now what's interesting is to step back and look at them in terms of the experience that was created and crafted. I like to use the word manufactured, and we'll get back to that. But then also when you think about the experience, and we have to think about what is that change that we're trying to bring about through something like a retreat. But so before we start talking about retreat, let's look at the experiences and change, and maybe we have to look at them at smaller scale so that we can kind of really dive in. And so I was thinking about experiences that I think are more common, like meetings, right? So you have meetings?
Some are great, some are too long.
Yeah.
They come in all shapes and sizes.
They do, yeah. And when you think about, as if we're a leader, and that could be a company owner, you could be a nonprofit, a director of a nonprofit, but you could also be a team leader.
Yeah.
You have your own team. You could be a director in a company, so you may not be responsible for the company, the wide scale success of the company, but you're successful for your team. I think it's pretty common to say that when people get other people together, we don't want to waste people's time. We want to make sure that the time is well spent. I mean, I think that's fair to say.
Are we able to put a disclaimer out to anyone that invites us to a meeting that we hope those expectations will be met?
We should, right?
Because really, it's like, my acceptance of this meeting automatically expects you to not waste my time.
To not waste my time. Right?
Because really, that's the most valuable commodity today in any organization is time. Because everyone's, for lack of a better word, everybody's stretched.
Yeah.
There's only so much human capital, and every organization is really operating at a deficiency. So time is precious.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about a meeting, how do we? And if we're going to take this all the way up to the concept of retreat, time is going to be a critical value in measurement, I would think.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times what we often forget is that as we're thinking about the way that we hold meetings, is that we often think, well, my meetings have been good, right? And so as an organization, hey, we can plan really good meetings. Again, kind of like, well, how do you measure that? You may not really know that your meetings were good, because my question is, did they bring about change?
Right.
And if we do get that feeling, that thought, it's like, oh, I think my meetings are really, really good, and then it comes time to plan the annual retreat, then a lot of times people think, oh, we can do that, so we should be able to plan a retreat.
Yeah, does it naturally equate to, oh, my meetings are good, my retreat's going to be good?
My retreat's going to be good, right? Yeah.
Probably not.
And so, so I think that's one thing that we just had to kind of lay out there, that most people understand that people's time should be well spent, and that it's that money, right, is important, right, to think about people's time. So the other thing I think is really interesting about when we think about these experiences that we create, we can start to think about, well, are there moments where we don't necessarily need to design the experience? And so we often think, like, I don't know if you've had this happen, but I've thought, well, sometimes I get more out of the impromptu meetings, right? The water cooler meetings,
right?
And I think what's really interesting is you look at like the water cooler kind of meetings, and if you start to really deconstruct that, and you think, were they designed?
Right.
And I think we would really find that they actually were more designed than we think they were.
Well, you know, you just evoked a memory, and you were directly part of this.
Yeah.
But do you remember back in the old days when you would pop by my office, and we would literally solve an incredible problem, and you would never sit down. You'd actually stand in the door frame.
Yep.
And invariably, you and many others would come in and lean against my door frame to the point where we named it Door Frame of Mind Awareness.
Yes.
And so it actually became hollow ground for meeting time that was respectful of time.
Yep.
And that we needed to get to the point and figure out what it is we're trying to solve.
Yes.
And move on.
Yeah.
And I think really that speaks to that whole thing about, you know, what constitutes a meeting.
Yeah.
You know, when does something get solved? How do we measure that?
Yeah.
You know, so
like how do we really plan and manufacture that experience?
Right.
And in both of those cases, because it's funny,
they weren't planned. Yeah.
There was an aspect of like the door frame of mind was a cultural element, and you enabled, right? You enabled that environment where I or others could come in and have a door frame of mind conversation, which, you know, that conversation, you might not have to schedule it.
No.
Right? You didn't have to set an agenda for it, but you created the environment that enabled an amazing conversation.
Right. And there was an expectation that was applied to that like, I'm coming over here, this conversation's going to happen, we're going to start here and we're going to end here.
Yes. Yep.
And we're going to get somewhere.
Yeah.
There was an implied expectation that we were going to go somewhere with this.
Correct. Yes.
And it wasn't just to have a conversation for the sake of, how's the kids? How's the family? You know what? No, this was about solving a problem.
Yeah. And so when we put these two things up against each other, this idea of like meetings, and they often are recurring, they happen every Monday, right? That kind of recurring, hey, we're going to get the team together for the ops meeting, or we're getting the team together for the brainstorming meeting. And then we have this other juxtaposed kind of like serendipitous kind of exchange.
Right.
But truly, though, if it's culturally built in, that door frame of mind conversation, even that properly placed water cooler, where that space where people can get together and have these impromptu things, I think most of it would say, I get more out of those things because they were enabled, right? Not necessarily manufactured in a way to kind of feel fake and feel like, right? Like you had to over-plan them. You know,
well, they were overplanned to the point where it's like, oh my God, I have another meeting.
Yeah.
And you know what? Back to the time is precious commentary. It's like, I don't have time for another meeting.
Yeah. And this is exactly why, generally, when you talk to people about like retreats, is people dread them. Right? Because it's kind of like,
it's like, oh my God, not only am I going to, it's like the proverbially longest meeting ever.
The longest meeting. It's like, exactly, right? It's like, oh my gosh, we not only have to do this.
My boss wants me for 3 days at a remote location that he can have me all to himself and talk about everything that I don't want to talk about. And,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
scary.
So it's this question of like, you know, when do you bring somebody like a mindset in to help with that manufacturing process? And we don't call it manufacturing, we call it design.
Right.
When do you bring an experienced designer, an event designer in to help you build up the plan, the strategy, the design of that experience. And the answer is that is not easy, because there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's one of, within your organization, within your organizational culture, if you know where you're successful. Maybe you are successful at creating those culturally serendipity kind of moments. Maybe you are very good at creating those meetings that don't feel like drudgery. And you know what? And maybe you have some really good ideas for your retreat, but that can also mean, oh, that's a much higher risk kind of environment, right? High cost. I mean, retreats can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
You need to make sure that it's worth people's time. Also, you're 9 times out of 10 out of the office, and you're taking a large portion, if not the entire group, to somewhere else. So then you have travel issues, you have travel potential, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of, and then you have just this aspect of, well, this is a very different environment where people are going to be interacting in a very different way.
Right.
And if that's not thought through, you could end up with an experience where people really kind of have negative interactions with each other.
You could have the reverse effect of what it was intended to create in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a company retreat we were on where we played volleyball. And I'm thinking, never during the year with my colleagues did we play volleyball. It wasn't part of our culture. But yet on the retreat, here we are out there playing volleyball. And it was very forced. It was very much like, no, we're all going out to play volleyball. It will be fun. And so, you know, whoa, you know where I'm going with this, right? And you know, for me, like, I'm a socially capable introvert. And yes, I am actually a very competitive athletic person, but I dislike team sports.
Yeah.
Like, I dislike playing on team sports. And so this whole logic, you could see the logical design was, well, we're a team. We should all be playing together. Let's go out on the playing field and play this sport. And unfortunately, it can bring out aspects of people's behavior that they may not bring out in their daily work. But boy, it comes out when you're out there hitting the ball around and, you know, potentially like really aiming to, you know, score. And then you all of a sudden this is a very, very different environment. Right. And so it seems innocent, doesn't it?
It seems innocent, but the reality, it's the truth. You speak, and much to our conversation that we had earlier about, you know, how we anticipate an experience to go. Not every person fits that, you know, the way, you know, much to the conversation on, you know, networking is just one tool.
Yeah.
And not everybody gets benefit from a networking event.
Yeah. So that,
And it's like, you know, has it been overdone? And it's just, you know, becomes very repetitive. And you know, so as you look at, you know, creating experiences, you know, if you're doing that within your own organization, sometimes you're a little too close to the situation.
Yeah.
And, you know, so an external creative can bring about something that we can't anymore because we're too close to it inside the organization.
Yeah. So it had to just talk about networking for a little bit, because I had a really interesting conversation about how could you do it, right? And so we've shared this. I've shared this sentiment with you many times about my thoughts on networking.
Right.
And generally it probably gets misinterpreted that I don't believe in networking. What I think we have to be cognizant of is by me saying to you, like, oh, you know, Denny, let's not do networking. And well, let's rethink networking. Let's do it in a different way. Is not saying networking is bad.
Right.
What it means is that we have to be really purposeful about the way that we network. And so this another business colleague of ours, you know, was talking to me about, oh, I'd love to create a networking experience. And so what I shared with her was, it's like, well, you know, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting about the way that we find satisfaction, the way that we see something as being memorable or engaging, or something that we really kind of like is meaningful. It changes over our lives. And what we know about that is, like, as something as simple as asking somebody, like, what makes you happy, what makes you comfortable, what makes you feel cozy and warm, like, right? So here's an example where generally, it's not the case for everybody, but generally as we get older, we need simpler things. We don't demand as much stimulation in our experiences to make us feel cozy and warm and comfortable. Right. And so you can apply that to a lot of different situations. Maybe for some, the most engaging evening is a warm blanket on a couch with the dog. Right. But and that may be incredibly invigorating. It may be incredibly, they find peace. When generally somebody who maybe is younger that hasn't had as many experiences needs more than that. Right. And they may find that to be incredibly like boring. They may find that to be not relaxing at all because it's like, oh, I just need to be doing something. And so it's not always predictable in terms of age, but generally speaking, as we get older, we need simpler things. And so here's how complex networking can be, because you generally you're not saying to people, you can only be of this age to walk in, right? And so where you may design a networking experience and say, look, I think all we need is food and the space, and the networking will happen. Because for you, and maybe for somebody who we're the same age, maybe that's like, we would find that very, like, we'd be happy with that. But the reality is we have people walking in the door that need more than that may, for whatever reason, maybe it's a personality type. Maybe it's just that they're a younger audience. And so maybe for them, they need more connectivity. They need something that's a little bit more meaningful to them. They have to have a reason to go over and talk to somebody. Maybe they have a personality that's not going to just walk up to a stranger and say, hey, this is me. Who are you?
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that, because even in the the little microcosm of the event itself, of the experience, that, my perception of what people want, and my natural inclination is I put some great food out, I make everybody feel like they belong there, and that this networking by collision occurs and everything's perfect. But that's just my version.
Correct.
But if you look around the room when these experiences are happening, people create their own experience within the experience. So much to your point about, observation, where you'll observe. Yeah. You're creating your own experience to see what's working and not working. And then there's the other little groups that might have 3 or 4 that'll form an experience inside the experience. And so it's kind of fascinating to watch what's happening. And the goal, I would think, of any experience that you're trying to create, whether it's an event like that or something as major scale as a retreat, is about how do you make sure you have something for everyone or for the majority of those people, because your goal, you're not going to make everybody happy, but your goal is to try to make most of everybody happy. I mean, I would think.
Yeah, and that gets to the point of if we really think about what the aim or the purpose of the experience is, I mean, that's another aspect of this. And again, we come down to when do you bring somebody in to help you do this work?
Exactly.
Right, to create, and in most cases, unless you've spent a lot of time thinking about experiences and human interaction and how people change and grow, we're going to talk about change here in a little bit, you probably don't have a lot of confidence in your own skill to do that kind of work. I mean, you kind of know what you want to set up, but then if you really kind of deconstruct what you've put together, right, the food and the space, well, so how could somebody like how could somebody like MYNDDSET help with that? And the answer is that it could be something as simple. And here's the invitation. Sometimes we think about, you bring in, say, an experience designer, we instantly think, oh, it's a lot of time and it's a lot of cost and it's a lot. Where the reality is, in that case, as long as we know what the aim is and we share that understanding, we understand that, the reality is maybe all we have to do is in the space. That's the aspect. We have food and space. Obviously, there's time, right? You've invited people to come at a certain time. We look at those core aspects and say, it could be as simple as, let's look at the space. And in the space design, have we allowed for those little areas for people to convene in a way that's unique to their group? And it could go up another level. It could be, have we created some kind of almost like a calling card for somebody to wear or somebody to choose and carry around and be noticed by others that are looking for that same kind of connection. Right. So that's like another level up. Yeah.
So, I love when we have conversations like this, because it really, I'm always looking at, what's an analogy that can kind of help to define this. Yeah. And, much of it has to do with, when's it time to bring in a professional to do something?
Right.
And so the whole time you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking, gosh, I put these events together all the time. And guess what? I'm not getting any of the opportunity for change out of the event because I'm too worried about putting on the event.
Right.
And I'm spending all the energy on that.
Yes.
Where had, I turned to a professional like MYNDDSET to come in and plan this, then I could be in community with the experience instead of worrying about that. So I think that's where organizations run the risk of putting the burden on creating these events to their own team. Right. The one risk is that they're too close to the situation in the first place. And secondly, now you've just denied every person the possibility of experience because their role is different.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some real value comes in to really considering, we might be single-handedly excluding people from our own experience just because we've tasked them with doing something that falls outside of their natural skill set, or maybe they do have some skills and don't get the ability to participate.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at all the players in an experience that's being created, whether it's one meeting or it's a whole retreat, there's a lot of opportunity for missed opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So that, I think that's a good segue into thinking about what an experience, the kind of hierarchy, if you will, of an experience, so that we could use those as ways to determine if it's right to bring somebody in. But also, more importantly, it's just that we understand like how human experiences can play out.
Right.
And there's some amazing work by Joe Pine. Joe Pine has a book called The Experience Economy, and I'm part of the World Experience Organization. We had an amazing conversation yesterday, which really feeds into this conversation that we've been planning. So talk about fortuitous, right? So, some of the things that we often aim for when we create an experience is to create something really engaging or something that's memorable.
Right.
And my own experience with creating something engagement is a long history of this, because I've been involved in education all my life, and I remember learning kind of like the ultimate thing you want to do in education is create engaging education. And so when then I started doing development of like online learning or virtual learning or computer-based learning, that's all we ever talked about. It was always about, is it engaging? Is it engaging? Is it engaging? And the more now that here I am, 15 years later, 20 years later, studying about human experiences and learning that the bottom of the experience kind of paradigm is engaging and memorable, right?
Here we've been setting the goal so low all this time.
setting the goal so low, right? And so when we look at kind of the triangle here, it really shows us that it's easy to get into the rut or into the norm, where it's just like, hey, I wanted them to come to this event. I want them just to remember it. I want it to be kind of meaningful, and I want it to be engaging. There's nothing wrong with that. And we do fall potentially into the trap of people thinking, well, we would only really get like design. We would only focus on design if we wanted something more. Right. And so therefore, to create something meaningful or something engaging, we may not have to do we don't really need to design that. We're okay with that. But if we're going to, do something that actually gets more transformative and creates that transporting kind of experience, then maybe we have to tap into somebody like an event, a designer like us. The issue with that is that then that means that what we've done is we've kind of relegated, that we only really do design at kind of what we think of as being the upper end of the scale of an experience. And what we're doing is almost devaluing the work we would do to create meaningful or memorable experiences or transporting experiences, because we're basically saying, we wouldn't bother designing those experiences. And so I think as we kind of dive into what's that purpose of your meeting or what's that purpose of your retreat, you start to realize that, okay, so maybe there's moments in that retreat or that higher thing you're trying to do that, you want it to be memorable.
Right.
But then human nature kicks in and shows us that it's even more complex than that. because the way that I may take away something and say it was memorable may not happen until I have started to reach that transformational kind of moment. So all of those things that you've manufactured for us to do, like for instance, maybe it's a stargazing, and I may think that was okay, that was fun, that was something enjoyable, but I may not really see that as being meaningful. I may not see that as being memorable until I'm closer to that moment when something clicks in me and I start to transform my thinking. I start to go through change, and then I could look back and say, oh, now I kind of know the tie between those things.
Right.
So we can't always predict in that experience what is going to be memorable or something that's going to be meaningful to somebody, because it may take them more time. It may take them a deeper connection to get to that point.
Right.
And so it's tough to make sure you're designing.
It's very tough.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's in that understanding that value might be measured a day down the road, a week down the road. I'll give you a classic story. I'm a storyteller, and and it goes. So I signed up. We'll call it a retreat, but it really was an opportunity years ago to give back. It was a week long to go into the mountains of Appalachia and give back to a community. And it was a faith-based organization that ran this, professionally brought in groups every week to do the same thing, to help, through construction and building to families that were disadvantaged in these communities of Kentucky. It was in rural Beverly, Kentucky. And, so there's a lot of hype that went into it. And the people they were professional groups that managed these experiences, and they brought in group after group, year after year. And I'll never forget, I got down there, I participated, I participated in the whole experience. And the whole time I'm down there, I was frustrated.
Yeah.
I was like, because I started looking at it logistically. It's like, okay, same thing. We had all these little group experiences. We had these nights and did different games. And, the whole thing was about, and I know their goal was to, in my mind, to help the people of this region.
Yeah.
It took me a week or two after I got home to realize that it had nothing to do. I mean, yes, people got help, but it really had nothing to do with what was happening physically. But really what was happening mentally was they were changing me to be able to come home and recognize what are things that I could do in my community.
Yeah.
And so the real value happened later.
Yeah.
But and so that was the genius of this group. But at the time, as an individual, I was thinking, this doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. It's that time, right?
It's like, my God, we're pouring thousands and thousands of dollars into this community year after year, and they don't seem to be getting any better. That was just my overall observation. But in the end, it said, no, this is different. You need to take what you just witnessed and see if you can replicate that back in your own community and giving. And it's no different. Same thing in an organization. You know what? Just like we talked, we get so caught up in the day-to-day. We've got the work that has to be done no matter what. Monday's coming, and we got a whole week's worth of work that needs to be done. And then that whole concept of, oh my gosh, we're gonna spend 2 days in retreat to try to, maybe under the perception of wellness, or maybe we want, and it looks like it's a gift. Trustful, oh, Jesus. And it's like, here we are, And in our minds today, the way we think today is like, I don't have 2 days to give up.
Yeah, right.
Because the reality, we've moved into a time today where, we take vacations, but I'm guessing 90% of the time, nobody's stepping in and doing your work while you're away anymore.
No.
That work is still going to be there for you to do when you get back.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of our organizations today.
Yeah.
So by golly, if you're going to make the investment in your team to create something transformational, do you really want to rely on just having a couple in-house people try to put something together if you really want to get to a transformational level? Yeah. I mean, I get it. I know where the value comes now.
Yeah, and the scary thing would be is that you may think that you're creating something that's going to bring about transformation, and the reality is it's kind of like that's not your wheelhouse.
Right.
Right. You're really good at running your organization. We make that assumption, right? You're really good at running your organization. But to create a transformative moment in a small microcosm of time typically is not what people are really, really good at, right? And especially one that has a lot of high risk to it.
Right.
But you also brought up this idea of change and having us understand what true change really is. In our conversation earlier, yeah. I said, well, a lot of times we don't really understand what change is. And so I gave the example of that, say, for instance, an organization chooses to make a software choice. Like maybe they're using one software package, and then they say, okay, we're gonna select another software package that's gonna do this work. And so it's easy to start to think, oh my gosh, that's change. Is it? The reality is that you did make a choice, and you chose to move in a different direction with your software. The question about whether or not it's change means we have to understand what change is really doing for individuals or for the organization. And so, kind of three things to look at in terms of what creating a retreat or creating something really a special experience for your organization, like what are the kind of types of change that it should bring about? And again, this kind of gets back to your point. You probably need some help figuring that out, right? And the one of them is that we really hope that when we create an experience that it can bring about new behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about the investment you make to take a group off-site, you're hoping, my thought is that most of the time you expect when you come back that there's been some new behaviors created. Maybe they're not mastered yet,
right?
But you hope that those new behaviors, that they've at least been sparked, which leads us down this line of saying, we also have to be cognizant of the limits of what we can do with, say, creating a retreat experience. We can design for that big change that we want to create. The reality is most likely that change is going to take time. It's going to take practice. It's going to take more than just, say, 3 or 4 days, and then you come back and it's like, oh, like a magic pill. Is it going to be done? No. Right? We can design for it, and we can design for that shift and that change. But it's going to require time afterwards. So this idea of new behaviors, it's like, what does that truly mean? And honestly, what it means is that when you really can claim success of your retreat, you have a group of people who they're no longer doing the things they used to do in the old ways they used to do them. Mm-hmm. And when you start thinking about that, that's how profound change can be. So if we could stop there and say, if your retreat is planning to get people to have new behaviors, it means that there's a time period where they're no longer doing certain things that you've identified that you don't want them to do anymore. And the fact that they don't even kind of look back. Right. It's like they're not going back to those old ways. That's pretty deep.
That's pretty deep.
That's pretty profound in terms of change, right? And I think, you and I have been part of those kind of experiences. I can honestly look back and say, the retreat that I went on, was there anything that got sparked and was purposely built in to that retreat that changed the way that I behaved and that I didn't look back on my old behaviors when I was at that company? And honestly, I would say no.
Yeah.
There wasn't. Now, has there been things that I look back on those experiences today and think, well, is there a lesson learned from them? I still really struggle with it. I look back and think, well, I maybe was engaged and maybe it was meaningful to me, but did it really truly change my behaviors? No. Now, granted, everybody that went maybe has a different experience than I did, but I don't remember having that debriefing.
Yeah. No, I think you raised some very good points, and so often, when you try to do something like this in house, mm-hmm. you're just like, you're not looking at what behaviors I want to change. Yeah. You're looking at it like, let's just take a moment in time and take a deep breath and let's get to know each other better.
Right.
You know what? Sometimes we get those very peripheral things that we want to work on and assume that the deep, meaningful things will just happen by nature. But what if it's actually planned? What if it's actually put together in such a way that, we're going to call it out for what it is. I'll give you a classic example, and I'm not picking on anything in my current career and experience, but I did get to participate recently in an experience that was specialized. It was only limited to a number of people. And there was some information given out about what it was intended to do. And I am guilty of filling in the rest in my own mind. I had created the expectations of what was about to happen for this specialized one-day training. And I was really wrong.
Yeah.
And I got there and I did it. And I'm not saying there wasn't any value in it, but it was totally what I wasn't expecting. And I didn't get what I had hoped to get. And had that been done, and I'm going to be honest, it was done in-house. And they put their own thing together, assuming what they thought people needed to get out of this.
Right.
And I guarantee you 80% of the people there probably did get something of value that met their expectations, but I was in a different place than that. And I just was a little frustrated that my expectations, I didn't manage them better myself. But in the same token, had they brought in a professional to run that, I think some of the communication, even before the event, would have helped manage those expectations going into it. Missed opportunity. Everybody was happy. A lot of people were given a nice pat on each other's back that they did a great job. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, good. And maybe there was a percentage of the population in that group that benefited that way. But much to our conversation earlier is, are you trying to provide an experience for the majority, as many as people as you can? Or are you missing someone? So
there's a whole other conversation we could talk about in terms of like designing for everybody, right, and which is a kind of a spin-off of like designing for the mass, or designing kind of like, it's almost like what we want to do is designing that everybody can have the experience from the event that we're creating that they need out of it, as long as we're kind of all aiming for the same goals, right? The same aim. That's another show. I mean, it literally is another show. How do you do that? I mean, you brought something about in terms of, for you, like another aspect of change is that true change. Like if we really look at the definition, the first one is that those behaviors, right? You do new behaviors. You don't look back. You don't look back. The other thing is, it's this aspect of falling in love with your new self, right? If you really truly look at change, and when you can honestly say, oh my gosh, I love what I've become. And so now when we think about those company retreats where you're trying to instill a new behavior, you're trying to instill a new interaction, or you're trying to instill the understanding of the organizational vision.
Right.
And if it's so manufactured that you end up with individuals coming out and saying, oh, I'm going to have to be somebody I'm not. And they attempt to perform or to be or to behave in ways that really go against them, just because that's the way you kind of dictated to them through your retreat that you need them to behave.
Right.
Then you haven't created change in a way that creates, like, that enables me to fall in love with that new person, that new me. That's a huge responsibility for a company or organization to recognize that that's how powerful that retreat moment or that whatever you create moment is for your team. Because if people are not falling in love with the new person that they are, we all know what they're going to do.
They'll be gone.
They'll be gone.
Right.
Right. And the reality is, it's like that's harder work than we think, right? That's why I'm saying, like, getting people to actually have an experience and then go through change that they love who they are. Now, I think you said it really well. They may be gone. The other thing is we are running companies. Yeah. And we do have this opportunity to take people and shift them into new behaviors that better align with our vision of our organization. And in the case where you take somebody and show them what it's going to take, you show them that vision, and they just don't feel it, and they just aren't understanding that their role is going to be something that they're going to value towards that particular vision. Mm-hmm. In that case, that person not falling in love with like who they would have to be, it could be a really positive moment for that person and the organization.
Right.
Because you could show to them, this isn't the place for you.
It's not a good fit.
It's not a good fit. So there's a great example of it. It's not necessarily bad for somebody to walk away and say, geez, I'm not going to be able to fall in love with my new self doing that. But recognizing that that is an aspect of change gives you that opportunity. Right. It's either going to be great or it could be telling that that person needs to move on.
Yeah. I think there's another aspect as well. Yeah. And that the leadership in an organization needs to be committed to that new person, that new change. Yeah. Because if they go about doing these for the wrong reasons, if they just have a retreat for the sake of, I'm just going to give my people a break and let them catch their breath and try to find themselves. But all of a sudden, transformation does happen and all of a sudden new people show up. But guess what? Leadership doesn't have a level of commitment to meet them with this new change.
Yeah.
That could be even worse than not having the retreat in the first place.
Yes. So a great story that comes from TV that fits this perfectly. So I was watching this old show. It's called The Guardian. I don't know if you remember The Guardian. And it was a hilarious moment because at one point, like late in there was three years of that. I think it was like in year 3, where if people don't know, it's about a law firm basically. And this law firm was going on a retreat.
Oh boy!
Right? So they were like off-site, and this idea of like the retreat gets planned for and designed without the company's perspective, especially like without the leadership's perspective on the things that you're going to do, kind of played out in this retreat.
Right.
So much so that the head, the father who owned the law firm, ends up in getting paired up with one of the more kind of controversial members of his team. And of course, when you get paired up, this means that you stay with them in the same room at night. And so there's this amazing, this amazing scene where literally they're sleeping in their individual beds, looking up. And of course, we all have different pillow talk. And so here's a case where the gentleman who's little bit more colorful, he obviously feels very comfortable in this moment, starting to share what he really thinks. And so he starts sharing what he really thinks. And of course, he's in the room with the owner of the company. And so you can just see this playing out. This is heading to disaster because he's in this comfortable moment. He's just sharing. And of course, the reaction from the owner of the company is like, And so you can feel the tension.
Right.
That you was like, it's like, so the interesting thing is when you were saying, it's like, is the leadership of the organization fully committed to the aim of that experience?
Right.
And in support of the change and the moments, these experiences that are going to be created. And clearly in this instance, I'm thinking, if I'm the leader of that company, why would I agree to create this incredibly awkward situation with me and another employee that's going to create and possibly potential spark this kind of interaction?
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that is not the right thing to do. In some companies' cultures, that may be perfectly normal. In that case, you could see that the leadership was not totally on board with the possible transformation, the possible experience that was being created.
Yeah.
And so it created a really awkward moment. And of course, then they had to have a meeting afterwards. And now, of course, you're outside of the retreat. You're back at the office. Like, hey, what you told me at the, while we were in the room together, right? And it's like, mushroomed. So, third thing, when we talk about change, and this is kind of, I think, where we'll wrap up, because it is what's really interesting about change, and especially transformative kind of change, to the point of like the word like metamorphosis, like the truly going through something that creates kind of a new version of you, right? Your being is changed, your identity maybe even changed. Again, it sounds really, really very big, but it is the response. When we're creating experiences, what is our aim? And a lot of times, the things that our clients come to us with, like, it would require people to go through metamorphosis, a true change in identity and being, in order to get to that point. And that's okay. But that's just, we have to understand and acknowledge that's going to require a significant shift. And so what does that kind of change mean? The other thing it can mean is that really, people may not even know what that new self even looks like, because it's like so far removed from their radar. And you may have an idea of the way you want to be as an organization, the way your culture wants to be, the shift that you want people to make. But me as a person that's part of that team, the new me that's coming down in the future, I can't even fathom it.
Right.
I may not be even able to understand it. And I think there's circumstances like, for instance, an analogy would be if you take somebody who is like not fit at a sport, and then if a future them is like almost Olympic athlete performance level in that sport, like that person probably cannot imagine themselves even at all they may picture themselves in that, but not imagine the physical demand, the practice that it would take, the dedication that it would take. Right. They may not have that at all in there. And I liken this to the caterpillar turning into the butterfly. Caterpillar, it lives in a world of crawling on things, and that's his world. Right. And then when the caterpillar changes into the butterfly, now all of a sudden, he's like, is he sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, someday I'm going to see my world from the air, from space. I'm going to be able to look down. It's not thinking about that. Granted, humans, we have a little more, mental capacity than caterpillars. But the analogy is that it's like we almost can't see what that future me is going to be like. Are we committed to that? When we try to create experiences, are we aware of that?
I doubt that we are.
Yeah.
I doubt that we are, but really that's where trust comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be aware of it, but I think you need to be willing. I think you have to be willing to allow yourself to change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you shouldn't participate in an experience like that in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you're there, it's because you recognize there possibly could be something better.
Yeah.
And it's not about being able to measure the change today, but really it's about being willing to expose yourself to change.
Yes. Start that journey.
Start the journey, knowing that your ultimate goal is it's going to bring about a positive change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust. The caterpillar, like you said, had no clue that that ever his life was going to be or her life was going to be any more than just crawling around.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a whole segment of society that are comfortable just remaining caterpillar.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's a whole other group that are motivated to know that there's something more.
Yeah.
And that something more can't always easily be defined.
Yeah.
But for many, it's taking flight, and seeing things from a new perspective. So I think that's what we have to be open to.
Yeah, yeah.
Not being able to say, this is exactly where I'm going. I want to get to this change. But just knowing that I'm going to move forward, and that forward progress doesn't have to be perfectly defined.
Right, yeah. So it's really interesting. We don't necessarily need to talk about the mechanics of a retreat. Right, and that's really interesting, powerful part of this conversation, because a retreat is just a type of thing.
It's a word.
Yeah, it describes like this moment. But when we talk about experience and what experiences are, and we talk about change, then that tells us kind of like, if you're going to plan that moment, that thing we call a retreat, by knowing more about experiences and change, you can make that decision. It's like, should I really pull somebody in to help me do this? Because maybe I have a true transformation in mind and I really need help with that. Or maybe I think I want transformation, but I don't know that I really want transformation.
Something could be just as simple as knowing that help exists.
Yes.
With that.
Yeah.
Because so often, We know we want something in an organization. We know we want to bring about change.
Yep.
But we think, oh my gosh, I have to solve this myself. And in reality, you don't.
You don't. You don't.
I was having a conversation earlier. I said, I can hang drywall myself.
The builder in you is coming out.
The reality is, it's not the fact that you can't do something.
Yeah.
But there are opportunities where there are professionals out there that are going to be much more efficient. They're going to give a much better product in the end. And you're going to walk away with a level of satisfaction that you probably wouldn't have got had you chosen to do it yourself. Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out for help is, I guess, the message here.
Yeah.
And know that professionals exist that can help you navigate this.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we end there.
Sounds like a plan.
This is a great episode of Untangling. Yeah.
I hope we haven't made it bigger than retangled.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Yep.